Anaya Mehra arrived in New York chasing hope, believing hard work would protect her future, while Caleb Whitmore watched from behind locked doors, hiding secrets that could destroy them both. What began as opportunity slowly turned into control, and by the time the truth surfaced, one life was already lost, and another was built entirely on lies. Anaya Mehra was 23 years old when she stepped into New York for the first time, carrying a single suitcase and a lifetime of expectations. She came from a quiet town in northern India where opportunities were limited and dreams often ended early. Her family believed this job abroad was a blessing. Working as a maid in America sounded like success, safety, and stability. Anaya believed it too. She imagined long hours of honest work, steady income, and a chance to lift her parents and younger siblings out of debt. The city greeted her without warmth. New York moved fast, loud, and without care for anyone trying to keep up. Tall buildings blocked the sky, and strangers passed by without looking at one another. Anaya felt small, but she reminded herself that this feeling was temporary. She was here for a reason. She was here to work. Her employer, Caleb Whitmore, lived in a high-rise apartment in Manhattan. The building was guarded, polished, and silent. Everything inside felt expensive and distant. Anaya had never seen a home like this before. Marble floors, glass walls, modern furniture, and rooms that felt too big for one person. Caleb was a successful businessman, known for keeping his life private. He lived alone most of the time and traveled frequently, or so Anaya was told. At first, her duties were simple and clearly defined: cleaning, cooking, laundry, and keeping the apartment organized. She followed instructions carefully, afraid of making mistakes. She spoke little and observed everything. Anaya believed that staying quiet and obedient was the best way to survive in a foreign country. She sent money home every month. Her mother cried with relief when it arrived. Her father spoke proudly about her to neighbors. Anaya became the family's hope. That pressure kept her going even on days when loneliness pressed heavily on her chest. Caleb noticed her discipline early on. He appreciated her efficiency and calm nature. Unlike other staff he had hired in the past, Anaya never complained. She worked long hours without question. Slowly, he began spending more time at home. Meetings were canceled, travel plans were postponed. Anaya noticed his presence more often, watching from a distance as she worked. The apartment felt different when he was there. The silence became heavier. Anaya sensed eyes on her, even when no words were spoken. She told herself it was nothing, that she was imagining things. After all, this was her boss. This was America. She did not want to misinterpret kindness or attention. Over time, small changes appeared in her routine. Caleb began requesting specific meals, asking about her background, and taking interest in her life back home. These questions felt personal, but Anaya answered politely. She believed trust was important. She believed this interest meant she was doing a good job. Outside the apartment, Anaya's world was limited. She rarely explored the city. Her visa conditions, long work hours, and fear of getting lost kept her indoors. New York existed mostly through the windows. She watched people live freely below, while she stayed hidden above them. Anaya often stood by the glass at night, staring at the lights, wondering if this sacrifice would truly be worth it. She missed her family deeply. Phone calls were short due to time differences and exhaustion. She did not share her loneliness. She did not want to worry them. Inside Caleb's apartment, boundaries slowly blurred. He spent more time at home, creating a routine that revolved around Anaya's presence. She became essential to his daily life. The power imbalance was invisible but strong. Anaya depended on this job for everything: money, shelter, legal status. She did not recognize the warning signs. She had never been taught to. To her, attention from someone powerful felt like protection. She believed being noticed meant being safe. What Anaya did not know was that her life had already begun to shift in a direction she could not control. The city that promised opportunity was quietly closing in around her. Trust was forming where fear should have been. And behind the calm surface of routine and work, something dark was beginning to take shape. Chapter 1 of Anaya's story ended not with danger, but with hope, and that hope would later become the reason she never saw the truth coming. As weeks passed, Anaya's life inside the apartment began to shift in subtle but unsettling ways. Her routine, once strict and predictable, slowly bent around Caleb's presence. He stayed home more often, canceling trips and working remotely. The apartment no longer felt like a workplace that emptied at the end of the day. It felt watched, controlled by an unseen rhythm that followed her every movement. Caleb's attention grew heavier. What began as polite interest turned into constant observation. He noticed small details about her habits, her expressions, and even her silences. Anaya tried to convince herself that this was normal behavior from an employer who valued loyalty. In her mind, questioning it felt dangerous. She reminded herself that she needed this job more than anything else. Her phone became both a comfort and a burden. Messages appeared late at night, asking if she was tired, if she was happy, if she trusted him. At first, Anaya responded cautiously. She feared misunderstanding his intentions. But the tone of the messages slowly softened, filled with concern and promises of support. Caleb spoke about how lonely he felt despite his wealth. He described his life as empty, surrounded by people who only wanted his money. Anaya listened. She had always been a good listener. Back home, she had learned that silence was safer than resistance. She believed empathy was kindness. What she did not realize was how carefully these conversations were shaping her emotions. Her isolation grew. She stopped calling her family regularly. When she did call, her voice sounded distant, distracted. She avoided sharing details about her daily life. Something inside her told her not to speak too much. She feared saying the wrong thing, feared consequences she could not explain. Caleb began offering her small gifts, new clothes, a better phone, money beyond her salary. Each gesture was presented as generosity, never obligation. Anaya felt grateful and uncomfortable at the same time. She accepted them quietly, believing refusal might offend him. She told herself this was how powerful people behaved. The apartment became her entire world. She rarely went outside except for short errands. Her days blurred together, marked by cleaning schedules and unspoken tension. She noticed changes in herself. She smiled less. She slept poorly. Yet she also felt a strange sense of importance. She was no longer invisible. Caleb's promises became larger. He spoke about helping her get legal residency. He hinted at a future where she would never need to work as a maid again. He described a life of comfort, stability, and protection. Anaya wanted to believe him. The idea of escaping hardship was intoxicating. But beneath the promises was control. Caleb began setting rules that were never written down. He wanted to know where she was at all times. He questioned her phone usage. He discouraged her from making friends. He framed it as concern, warning her about dangers outside. Anaya mistook restriction for care. Her appearance changed. She dressed more carefully, not for herself, but to meet expectations she did not fully understand. She became hyper-aware of her behavior, her posture, her tone. Every action felt evaluated. The imbalance between them deepened. Caleb held her job, her housing, and her future in his hands. Anaya held nothing but belief. She felt trapped but did not recognize it as danger. She believed endurance was strength. At night, she lay awake, replaying his words in her mind. She questioned whether this connection was real or imagined. She felt guilt, confusion, and fear tangled together, yet she also felt chosen, special in a way she never had before. She did not know that this was the beginning of her isolation from reality. She did not know that trust, once given, would soon be used against her. The affair was not visible to the outside world. It lived quietly behind closed doors, growing stronger in silence. By the end of this chapter of her life, Anaya was no longer just an employee. She had become emotionally dependent on the very person who controlled her fate. And while she believed she was moving closer to security, she was actually stepping deeper into a situation she would not be able to escape. The shift did not happen all at once. It began with small moments that felt wrong but were easy to ignore. Anaya noticed that Caleb's promises stopped turning into actions. The legal help he spoke about never moved forward. The future he described became vague. Whenever she asked questions, the answers changed. Sometimes he dismissed the topic. Other times he acted offended, as if doubt itself was a betrayal. Anaya began paying closer attention. She checked her bank account one night and noticed withdrawals she did not recognize. The amounts were small but frequent. At first, she assumed it was a mistake. Then she checked again. More money was missing. Panic settled in her chest. That money was meant for her family. It was not extra. It was everything. She did not confront him immediately. Fear held her back. Instead, she watched. She listened. She noticed how carefully he avoided certain topics. She noticed how his mood changed when money was mentioned. The man who once seemed confident now carried tension in his movements. His phone rang often, and he stepped away to answer it. Papers appeared and disappeared from his office desk. Late nights became common. Anaya realized something was wrong. The sense of safety she once felt faded. The apartment no longer felt secure. It felt unstable, like standing on ground that could collapse at any moment. She also discovered that Caleb was not living the life he claimed. A message appeared on his phone one evening while it lay unattended. Anaya did not mean to see it, but the name caught her attention. The message suggested a life he had never mentioned, a life that did not include her. The truth hit her slowly and painfully. The future she had imagined was never real. Confusion turned into fear. Fear turned into urgency. Anaya knew she needed to leave. She began thinking about returning home, even if it meant facing shame and disappointment. Survival mattered more than pride. She started planning quietly. She gathered her documents. She saved what little money remained. She avoided attention and kept her distance. But Caleb noticed the change. He sensed her withdrawal. His behavior shifted from calm to sharp. His kindness disappeared. His questions became interrogations. Anaya felt trapped again, but this time she understood it. The realization was heavy. She saw how isolated she had become. She had no friends, no support system, no one in the city who truly knew her situation. Her family was thousands of miles away. She considered going to the authorities, but fear stopped her. Her visa status was fragile. She did not know her rights. She had heard stories of people being sent back with nothing. Silence felt safer than the unknown. Then she made a mistake. She asked for answers. She asked about the money. She asked about the promises. She asked about the future he once described. The questions changed everything. After that, the atmosphere inside the apartment became unbearable. The tension was constant. Caleb avoided her during the day and watched her closely at night. The power dynamic became visible. no longer hidden beneath politeness. Anaya knew she had crossed a line. She knew she had become a risk. The realization terrified her. One morning she left the apartment to buy groceries and did not return for hours. She walked the city aimlessly, trying to think. She considered going to the Indian consulate. She considered disappearing. She considered everything except staying. When she returned, she packed a small bag. She planned to leave quietly within days. She planned to survive. But the city never gave her the chance. That night, her phone went silent. Calls went unanswered. Messages stopped. The routine that once defined her life vanished without explanation. Her family waited for her call. It never came. Days passed. No salary was sent. No message arrived. The silence grew louder with each hour. Anaya Mehra, who once arrived in New York full of hope, disappeared into the shadows of the city. And the truth about what happened next would only surface much later, after it was far too late to save her. The discovery came unexpectedly, not through a missing persons report, but through a routine inspection. A storage facility on the outskirts of the city reported a foul smell coming from one of its units. At first, the concern was dismissed as spoiled goods or trash left behind. But when the unit was opened, the truth revealed itself in a way that stunned even experienced investigators. Inside the small, windowless space was Anaya's body. She had been wrapped carefully, positioned in a way meant to delay detection. There were no signs of struggle in the unit itself, suggesting the crime had taken place elsewhere. It was clear this was not a random act. It was deliberate, controlled, and planned. The location was chosen for one reason only: to hide her. News of the discovery spread quickly through law enforcement channels. Her identity took time to confirm. She had no local records beyond her employment, no close contacts, no emergency numbers in the system. To the city, she had been almost invisible. Once her name was confirmed, investigators began reconstructing her final days. The last confirmed sighting placed her near Caleb's apartment. Security footage from nearby streets showed her entering the building. There was no footage of her leaving. Caleb was questioned as a routine step. He claimed she had quit suddenly and left the city. He described her as unstable, emotional, and unreliable. His story sounded rehearsed. It lacked detail. Investigators took note. A deeper search revealed inconsistencies. The storage unit had been rented under a shell account linked to one of Caleb's business entities. Surveillance footage from the facility showed a vehicle matching one registered to his company entering late at night. The timestamps aligned closely with the estimated time of Anaya's death. The apartment became the next focus. Forensic teams found traces that had been carefully cleaned but not completely erased. Microscopic evidence suggested the crime scene had been altered. Someone had tried very hard to remove signs of what happened. As the investigation unfolded, Caleb's public image began to crack. Financial records revealed mounting debt, unpaid loans, and failing investments. He was under pressure from multiple directions. Anaya, with her questions and plans to leave, had become a threat to the fragile structure of his life. Investigators uncovered more disturbing details. Anaya's bank account showed unauthorized withdrawals. Her identification had been used in transactions she never approved. The relationship between employer and employee had crossed legal and ethical boundaries long before it turned violent. The case gained media attention. Headlines focused on the contrast between wealth and vulnerability, power and silence. Public outrage grew as details emerged about how isolated Anaya had been. Many asked how someone could disappear in a city so full of people. Her family was notified days later. The news traveled across continents, landing in a home that had waited endlessly for her return. Shock turned into grief,
and grief into unanswered questions. They had trusted the opportunity that took her away. They had trusted the promise of a better life. As evidence stacked up, Caleb's behavior changed. He became defensive, then withdrawn. He hired legal representation and stopped cooperating, but the trail was already too clear. Every attempt to hide the truth had left another mark. The storage unit, meant to conceal the crime, became the strongest link tying him to it. The careful planning revealed something worse than panic. It revealed intent. By the time charges were prepared, the story was no longer just about a murder. It was about exploitation, manipulation, and the dangerous silence surrounding those with no voice. Anaya's life, reduced to evidence bags and timelines, forced the city to confront a truth it often ignored. Her death was no accident. It was the final act of a situation built on imbalance and control. And as investigators closed in, it became clear that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, had finally surfaced.
The arrest happened quietly, without drama or public display. Caleb Whitmore was taken into custody early in the morning, before the city fully woke up. By then, the case against him was no longer built on suspicion, but on a clear trail of evidence that connected every hidden piece. What began as a missing person had turned into a full exposure of a carefully concealed crime. As investigators laid out the timeline, the full picture emerged. The relationship had never been equal, never consensual in the way it was presented. Anaya's dependence had been engineered. Her isolation was not accidental. Every promise made to her served a purpose, and every delay kept her under control. When she began to ask questions and prepare to leave, that control was threatened. Financial records revealed the depth of exploitation. Caleb had used Anaya's identity to cover gaps in his failing business. Small amounts taken repeatedly had added up to thousands. It was not carelessness, it was calculated. She had trusted him with access because she believed in the future he described. That trust became another tool used against her. Forensic experts confirmed that the crime occurred inside the apartment. The absence of obvious signs of struggle was not proof of peace, but of fear and compliance. Anaya had been trapped long before her final moments. The storage unit was chosen to delay discovery, not because of panic, but because of planning. This detail changed everything. Public reaction grew stronger as more details were released. People questioned how easily someone like Anaya could be erased. She had no criminal record, no history of trouble. She had worked, sent money home, and stayed silent. That silence, once seen as obedience, was now understood as vulnerability. Caleb's defense focused on denial, but it collapsed under scrutiny. His statements contradicted documented movements. His financial explanations did not align with transaction records. Each attempt to shift blame only reinforced the truth. There was no outsider, no unknown threat. The danger had always been inside the apartment. Anaya's family arrived in New York weeks later. The city that once symbolized hope now felt cold and unforgiving. They walked through places she had described only briefly, trying to understand how her life had unfolded so far away from them. They spoke about her kindness, her sense of responsibility, her belief that hard work would protect her. Her story began to resonate beyond the courtroom. Advocacy groups pointed to systemic failures. Migrant workers, especially women, often lived in fear of losing their jobs, their visas, or their safety. Anaya's case became an example of how easily power could be abused behind closed doors. During the trial, every piece of evidence carried weight. The storage unit records, the surveillance footage, the altered crime scene, the financial trail. Together, they told a story that words alone could not undo. The verdict, when it came, brought a measure of justice, but not closure. Anaya's life could not be returned.
Her dreams ended before they had a chance to take shape. The sentence acknowledged the crime, but it could not measure the loss. For her family, justice was a word that still felt incomplete. In the end, Anaya Mehra was remembered not as a victim of a scandal, but as a young woman who trusted the wrong person in a system that failed to protect her. Her story forced difficult conversations about silence, dependency, and power. It reminded the world that danger does not always come from dark alleys or strangers, but often from places that appear safe. Her story did not end with her death. It continued in the awareness it created, in the warnings it carried, and in the voices that spoke her name when she no longer could. The truth stayed buried for a time, but it did not disappear. And when it finally surfaced, it made sure she would not be forgotten.
The case did not end when the verdict was delivered. For the city, the headlines faded within weeks, replaced by newer stories and louder scandals. But for those who looked closely, the consequences continued to unfold in quieter, more lasting ways. Anaya Mehra's name remained in court records, reports, and community meetings, slowly becoming more than just a victim's label. Authorities conducted internal reviews after public pressure mounted. Questions were raised about oversight, about how a young migrant worker could live and die in near total isolation without triggering concern. There were no emergency check-ins, no routine welfare visits, no safeguards strong enough to notice when someone disappeared from daily life. The system had functioned as designed, and that was the problem. Advocacy organizations began using Anaya's case as a reference point. Her story revealed patterns that were uncomfortable to acknowledge. Live-in workers often existed in legal gray areas. Their housing was tied to employment. Their immigration status depended on silence and compliance. Abuse, when it happened, stayed hidden behind closed doors and private contracts. Anaya's digital footprint became part of the record. Her phone data, once ignored, showed gradual withdrawal from the outside world. Fewer calls, shorter messages, long periods of inactivity. Investigators later admitted that these signs were common in exploitation cases, yet rarely treated as urgent. Her family returned home carrying more than grief. They carried guilt, anger, and unanswered questions. They replayed every conversation they had with her, searching for missed warnings. They wondered if different choices might have saved her. Those questions followed them long after the legal process ended. Back in the neighborhood where Anaya grew up, her story spread quietly. Parents spoke about it in lowered voices. Young women listened closely. The idea that hard work abroad always led to safety was no longer taken for granted. Opportunity began to feel more complicated, more fragile. Caleb Whitmore's life unraveled completely. His conviction led to additional investigations into his business dealings. Partners distanced themselves. Assets were seized. The image he had carefully built collapsed under scrutiny. What remained was a record of manipulation that extended beyond one victim. Anaya had not been the beginning, only the moment when the pattern became impossible to ignore. The apartment where the crime occurred was sold, renovated, its history erased from listings and advertisements. New residents moved in unaware of what had happened within those walls. The city moved on, as it always did. Buildings changed hands, and stories were buried beneath fresh paint and higher prices. Yet Anaya's case continued to surface in training sessions for social workers and law enforcement. It became an example of what exploitation looked like when it wore the mask of privilege. It showed how control could exist without chains, how fear could grow without bruises. Her name was added to databases, to annual reports, to statistics that measured loss in numbers.
But for those who remembered her story in full, she remained a person, not a case. A daughter who sent money home, a sister who believed sacrifice was temporary, a young woman who thought trust would protect her. The greatest impact of her story was not legal reform or public outrage, but awareness. People began asking different questions. Who cleans the apartments behind guarded doors? Who lives unseen in luxury buildings? Who disappears quietly without headlines? Anaya Mehra never sought attention. She wanted stability, dignity, and a future. What she received, instead, exposed the danger of silence and imbalance. Her life ended in isolation, but her story did not remain there. In the end, Chapter 6 was not about closure. It was about echo. The echo of a life that passed through a city without being seen until it was too late. And in that echo lived a warning that could not be ignored. When power goes unchecked and silence is mistaken for consent, the cost is measured in lives that should never have been lost.
Time continued to move forward, but Anaya Mehra's story refused to disappear. Long after courtrooms emptied and news segments stopped airing, traces of her life surfaced in unexpected places. Her case became a reference whispered among immigrant communities, shared cautiously between women who recognized parts of themselves in her experience. It was not fear that kept her memory alive, but recognition. In New York, small community centers began holding informal meetings focused on worker safety. These gatherings were quiet and practical, not political. People spoke about boundaries, about documents, about the risks of isolation. Anaya's name was mentioned without drama as a reminder of what could happen when someone had no one nearby to turn to. Her story traveled without headlines, passed from person to person like a warning meant to protect others. Her family tried to rebuild their lives, but grief reshaped everything. The money she once sent home was gone, replaced by legal paperwork and memories that arrived without warning. Her room remained untouched for months, clothes folded, photographs left in place. Letting go felt like erasing her. Holding on felt unbearable. They created small rituals to keep her present, lighting a candle on certain days, speaking her name during family gatherings. These acts did not bring peace, but they brought connection. Anaya became part of daily life again, not as a tragedy, but as someone remembered. Far away, in the city where she died, people walked past her former workplace without knowing her story. The building stood tall and ordinary, blending into the skyline. No marker indicated what had happened, no plaque acknowledged the life lost inside. This absence felt symbolic. The city did not memorialize people like Anaya. It absorbed them and moved on. Yet traces of her existence remained in digital records and archived footage. Her image appeared briefly in training materials, in case studies, in quiet presentations about exploitation. Each time her story carried the same lesson. Harm does not always announce itself. It often grows slowly, hidden behind routine and trust. Those who studied the case noticed how long it took for danger to become visible. There were no dramatic warning signs, no sudden collapse, just gradual isolation, shifting control, and silence mistaken for consent. Anaya's experience challenged the idea that victims always recognize their situation in time. Sometimes survival instincts delay action rather than trigger it. For many young women considering work abroad, her story changed how they prepared. They asked more questions, they shared contact details, they promised to stay in touch. These small changes did not undo the past, but they reshaped the future for some. Anaya never intended to become a symbol. She wanted privacy, stability, and a chance to help her family. But her life revealed a truth that could not be ignored. When someone's world becomes too small, danger finds space to grow. When power is uneven and unchecked, trust becomes a liability.
Years later, her name still appeared in quiet conversations, not spoken loudly, not sensationalized, just remembered. In that remembrance was a kind of justice that no sentence could provide. She mattered. Her life had weight. Chapter 7 did not bring resolution, it offered reflection. It asked viewers to look beyond the crime itself and see the conditions that allowed it to happen. It asked who is protected and who is invisible, who is believed and who is expected to endure. Anaya Mehra's story ended, but its impact continued to ripple outward. In every person who learned to question power, in every worker who chose to speak sooner, in every family who stayed more connected across distance. Her life was brief, but it was not meaningless. It became a reminder that behind closed doors, behind quiet routines, there are lives shaped by trust and vulnerability. And when those lives are ignored, the cost is irreversible. The final chapter was not written in courtrooms or headlines. It was written in awareness, in memory, and in the quiet determination to notice the unseen before it is too late.
Years passed, but the question at the center of Anaya Mehra's story never fully settled. It lingered in the background of conversations, resurfacing whenever another case appeared that looked uncomfortably familiar. People asked how many others were still living unseen, how many stories were unfolding quietly behind closed doors without an ending yet known. Anaya's case slowly became part of a larger pattern recognized by researchers and journalists who revisited it long after public attention faded. They saw how her life fit into a cycle that repeated across cities and countries. Young workers arrived full of hope. Employers offered opportunity mixed with dependence. Boundaries blurred. Silence followed. By the time something broke, it was often too late. What made Anaya's story especially haunting was how ordinary it seemed at the beginning. There was no sudden danger, no dramatic warning, just a job, an apartment, and trust built day by day. This ordinariness made the outcome harder to accept. It challenged the belief that tragedy always announces itself loudly. For those who learned about her case later, the details felt personal. People imagined the quiet moments of her life, the routines she followed, the thoughts she kept to herself. They wondered how many times she hesitated before speaking, how many moments she convinced herself that things would improve. These unanswered questions became the emotional core of her story. In academic circles, her case was cited when discussing coercive control. Experts pointed out that violence does not always begin with force. It often starts with dependence, isolation, and gradual loss of autonomy. Anaya's experience illustrated this progression with painful clarity. The absence of visible harm delayed intervention, allowing the situation to escalate unchecked. Her story also exposed how easily responsibility was shifted onto victims. Early commentary questioned her choices, her silence, her trust. Over time, that narrative changed. The focus moved toward the environment that limited her options, toward the power imbalance that made resistance risky, toward the systems that failed to notice when someone vanished from daily life. Anaya's family continued to carry her memory forward. They spoke about her not only in grief, but in pride. She had been brave to leave home, brave to support them, brave even in her uncertainty. Remembering her this way did not erase the pain, but it restored dignity to her life beyond the circumstances of her death. In quiet moments, people who heard her story reflected on their own lives, on the power dynamics they accepted without question, on the silences they maintained to avoid conflict. Anaya's experience forced uncomfortable self-examination. It reminded viewers that exploitation often relies on social norms as much as individual intent. The city itself seemed unchanged. Streets remained crowded, buildings rose higher, new stories replaced old ones. Yet beneath the surface, Anaya's case left an imprint.
It became part of an unspoken awareness that not all danger is visible, and not all victims are heard in time. Her story did not end with solutions neatly tied together. There was no moment where everything was fixed. Instead, it offered a lasting unease, a reminder that vigilance must extend beyond obvious threats, that care must include those who live quietly on the margins of comfort and privilege. Chapter 8 was about legacy, not in monuments or laws, but in perception. It asked viewers to reconsider what safety looks like and who is included in that definition. It challenged the idea that silence equals consent and that opportunity always comes without cost. Anaya Mehra's life was shaped by hope, trust, and endurance. Her death exposed the fragility of those qualities in the face of unchecked power. Yet her story endured because it revealed truths that many preferred not to see. In the end, what remained was not just a true crime story, but a human one, a reminder that every routine hides reality, every closed door holds a life, and every silence deserves attention. And as long as her story continued to be told, Anaya was no longer invisible.